Really heavily requested topic today. Let's do the clap for professionalism. Recently, two discoveries, one in Oregon, one in Brazil, have reignited the debate about when humans first arrived in America. My goodness, this debate is just ongoing, never ending. Today we're going to talk about each of them and what they might mean for this highly debated question: when did humans arrive in the Americas? First, this video is sponsored by my lunch, which was made by Factor. Factor sell little ready meals that are delicious and great, and here's why you should consider buying them. First, they are fresh food, never frozen. Never ever frozen, which is always nice. It comes straight to your door every week. So, super convenient if you're busy. I'm busy, you're busy, we're all busy. They've got it covered. They've got you covered. They're super quick, easy to make, just 2 minutes in the microwave, bish bash bosh. They are calorie conscious. Every meal is about 550 calories or less, so if you have some weight loss or fitness goals, they're great. And honestly, the more I appear on camera, that's just something that more and more weighs on my mind. And finally, they're tasty. They're super tasty. They're honestly the tastiest ready meals I've ever had. Sweet potato tofu curry. It's good. They're made by HelloFresh, who sponsored the last video, so shout out to them. They also make tasty food. I'm always terrible at preparing lunch, so for me, it's a great option because otherwise I'd just be eating takeaway. And I'm eating way too much takeaway, that's for sure. If all of that sounds good, head to factor75.com and use code Stefan50 for 50% off your first box. Imagine explaining anything of that to someone that lived 25,000 years ago. They'd be like, what's a box? First, it's important super quickly just to discuss why American archaeology should be so heavily debated time and time again. Well, it's basically all to do with out of Africa. Modern humans, my ancestors, your ancestors, mainly evolved in Africa and neighboring regions before expanding to the rest of the world. And it's a major preoccupation of Paleolithic archaeology to try and figure out how that migration occurred. When did we reach different parts of the world? In every region, the debate is a little bit different. In Europe, the debate really revolves around when did modern humans replace Neanderthals and how did that transition occur? In Western Asia and Southern Asia, the debate is similar. It really revolves around who was living there, what kind of hominin, what kind of ancient human. Were these, in fact, key regions alongside Africa in the evolution of Homo sapiens? Probably yes, I would bet. But there are two regions where the arrival of modern humans is really heavily debated: Australia and America. Australia is heavily debated because it has not been attached to Asia in the entire time that humans have been evolving. Millions upon millions of years it has been separate from Asia. It's why their animals are so funky. You know, there are koalas and stuff. So the arrival of modern humans in Papua New Guinea and Australia had to have involved a seagoing voyage, a deliberate voyage of exploration across the sea. And it was probably the first time in human history that that had happened. So when humans arrived in Australia, it's just heavily debated, big interest of Paleolithic archaeology. In America, the debate is kind of similar. America was only connected to Asia via a landmass that we call Beringia, that is now way below the water. Problem is that even though America was connected to Asia, there were enormous ice sheets. The entirety of Canada was covered in ice sheets. And so the way inland was completely blocked. So again, the first humans in North America had to travel by water down the coastline of the North Pacific, which would have been a difficult voyage, I'm sure. My goodness. We've all seen the crab fishing thing on Discovery Channel. This is the lost landmass of Beringia here. You can see this huge landmass once connected Alaska to Siberia, but the way inland was blocked by these enormous glaciers. So again, the arrival of humans in America just says so much about the capabilities of people deep in prehistory, in the Paleolithic. When it happened, though, is highly debated. The first really widespread archaeological culture in America is the Clovis culture. Many of you have probably heard about it. I've actually got a replica Clovis tool here. Clovis people made these really distinctive, fluted, curved points. They're absolutely fantastic piece of craftsmanship, and they're found widely across North America. Look at this map here. You can see all across North America you can find Clovis points, and they date between 13,500 and 12,800 years ago. So we know for sure humans were living across North and South America by that point. Definitely. We also know that modern Native Americans are their descendants from the genetics of a burial that contained Clovis tools, the Anzac child. So, Native Americans, their ancestors, all across the Americas by 13,500 years ago. Most archaeologists believe that people were here before that point, and that idea is backed up by genetics too. But how far back, how much earlier than Clovis, is just really heavily debated. I just made a video that came out like 3 weeks before these new discoveries on a really promising site in Idaho. Excellent timing. Thank you there, archaeologists of America. Yeah, I just made a video on a site in Idaho which dates to 16,000 years ago and contains points called western stemmed points. I think western stem points are the strongest signal we have so far for the first Americans because they're at least contemporary and probably predate Clovis in several locations. They're found across Western USA, and they are similar to tools being produced in North Asia at a similar time. So it's sort of exactly what you would expect to find for a pre-Clovis population in America. Check that video out. I went on the location, I interviewed experts. It's an absolute banger. And yeah, came out at the absolute worst time. But what can you do? What can you do? Any early archaeological site in America just can't help but raise the question, what happened between this time and Clovis? It just can't help but raise that question, especially if the site predates Clovis by 10,000 years, 15,000 years. You know, what were humans doing in that intervening period? The further back in time you go, the harder that gap is to explain. But anyway, let's look at these sites. Okay, site number 1, Rimrock Draw in eastern Oregon. You can see it here, just outside Burns in eastern Oregon, out in the high desert. According to the press releases, an archaeological site that dates to 18,000 years ago. This one is super interesting. There's really interesting stuff. The first thing to mention is that 2 tools were found there, 2 scrapers. I've only been able to find a picture of one of them. Shout out to Andrei Kostopoulos, archaeologist that writes the blog Archaeothoughts, for getting the only decent picture up of these tools. Apparently they were shared to the National Park Service Facebook page, I think, or Oregon Museum of Natural History Facebook page. This is the only decent picture I've been able to find of them, so shout out to Andrei. What's so interesting about this is that this was definitely a human man-made tool. You can kind of see how they've produced this nice large flake and then they've deliberately napped the edge all around to turn it into some sort of scraper, probably for processing meat, processing hides. So a deliberately man-made object ticks the box straight away. There are some early archaeological sites in America where there is some debate about whether the tools are man-made or they're just interesting rocks produced naturally. But this is almost certainly a man-made tool. It's also made out of a rock agate, I think, and it's hard to find information on there, but I think it's kind of an exotic rock. I don't think it is from that exact location. Again, some early sites in America where people are arguing for these human-made tools, the rocks are from that location. For example, I'm thinking specifically of Chiquehite Cave in Mexico, Chiquehite. Archaeologists do argue that these tools are man-made, but critics say, oh, these are limestone rocks in a limestone cave. They could have just fallen off the roof and broken in an interesting way. Humans, of course, are not the only people that can break rocks. But this here is Too sophisticated to be produced naturally, I think. And I think it's an exotic rock. It was carried to that location. So straight from the off, great sign that these are man-made. But more importantly, the dating of this site seems to be on really solid foundations. First of all, these tools are found alongside the remains of a camel. Camels have been extinct in America for a very long time. So the moment you find tools with a camel in America, you know you're dealing with a Paleolithic site for sure. It was also found beneath a layer of volcanic ash that dates to 15,000 years ago. When something is found below a layer of volcanic ash, those things can be very easily dated. So everything about it just seems to be on a really strong footing. It's definitely a man-made tool, found with extinct animals, below a layer of volcanic ash, can be dated. As long as the dating and everything checks out with this tool and with this camel, this is the real deal. This is exactly what you would want to find in an early archaeological site. That date of 18,000 years old is really, really interesting. Let me go back to Google Earth here. So you can see the archaeological site down here in central Oregon. Just north of it, just a couple of 100 kilometers further north, is the Columbia River Basin, this huge area down here. Big basin here, and the river valley goes out towards the sea there, the Columbia River Gorge. Absolutely stunning landscape, incredible landscape that was basically formed by the melting of those glaciers that were in Canada, these huge Ice Age glaciers that blocked the continent of North America. When they melted, the huge amount of water that was released just carved these massive channels into the earth. And I think I'm right in thinking that occurred 18,000 years ago, which means that, the Native Americans producing that scraper, eating that camel, would have witnessed just one of the most spectacular floods in human history. Yeah, really dramatic, really spectacular, and just, man, you can't even imagine. Dramatic. The location of this site is also really interesting because if we're hypothesizing that people traveled along the coast into North America, the ice sheets basically stopped around where the state of Washington is now. So just south of the state of Washington, just south of the Columbia River Valley, is where you would expect to find the earliest archaeological sites in America. The one I made a video on in Idaho was also in a river that connects to the Columbia, just over here, about here somewhere. Rimrock Drawing Rock Shelter has really got everything. Right place, right tool, human-made tool in an easily dateable context. As long as everything checks out, this is really solid evidence for people in the Americas. Really, really solid evidence. Site 2, though, is a little bit harder to work out what's going on. Let's check it out. Santa Helena Rock Shelter in central Brazil, just outside the city of Cuiabá. Cuiabá? Is that how you say that? Apologies to all the Brazilian people out there. This site is really interesting. Here, archaeologists found 3 osteoderms. That's a bone that is connected to skin. Like an armadillo's shell is an osteoderm, I believe. These osteoderms belong to a giant ground sloth, though. The animals that were eating avocados. Shout out to them. Without them, we wouldn't have avocados. But archaeologists found 3 osteoderms with these large holes in them. I think they're about 5 millimeters across the holes, half a centimeter. Kind of exactly the size of hole you would expect in a piece of bone if it was being worn as a necklace. You can compare it to these Paleolithic artifacts from Europe. Pieces of bone, pieces of teeth, shells with small holes drilled in them to hang them, wear them as jewelry. And to look at them, they just look human-made. Like, I know it's a terrible line of evidence just to say it really looks human-made, but to see them compared to Paleolithic artifacts in Europe, they just look human-made. These have been reliably dated to 27,000 years ago. There's no real problem with how these things were dated. They used 3 methods of dating have been used to date the site that these objects were found in. So there's no real doubt that these things are 27,000 years old, which, in terms of human arrival in the Americas, is getting really up there. And the fact that it is from central Brazil is a real head scratcher. You can't help but think, if humans are in Brazil, central Brazil, by 27,000 years ago, then why do we not find tools widespread across the entire continent until 13,500 years ago? Part of it could be archaeologists and the bias that archaeologists have, site bias, an old bias in favor of Clovis tools. Me personally, though, my personal opinion, could be wrong, could absolutely be wrong. It's my personal opinion. I don't think it can be explained by the bias of archaeologists, because most archaeological sites are found by normal people just going about their everyday life, building houses, building roads, building trains, building cities. You know, we're digging up the earth all the time. And so if there were humans widespread across the continent at that time, I think we'd have found evidence for them, regardless of where archaeologists are looking, and regardless of what bias archaeologists may or may not have. So it's a real head scratcher. It could be that populations, small populations of humans, made it to the Americas at other times in prehistory, and for whatever reason were just not successful enough to create a permanent population. You know, maybe just the amount of people that made it to America for whatever reason was so small that it just couldn't continue on throughout history. So a scenario like that could explain all of these anomalous finds that we have in America. But there is a real complicating factor with this site. So these three osteoderms were 3 out of over 7,000 recovered from the site, I believe. Thousands and thousands of osteoderms have been recovered, and only 3 are argued to be made by humans. Many of the other osteoderms from the site also have holes in them, caused by rodents and caused by fleas. You can see a picture of how a flea makes a hole in these osteoderms here. Female flea gets into it and just expands their abdomen to insane proportions and just creates this cavity in the bone. It's absolutely disgusting. What? God, I hate fleas and all bugs like that. Fleas, mosquitoes, ticks, get out of here. You're not welcome in my house. Here you can see some osteoderms with holes that the authors argue were not modified by humans. Some of them contain some large holes caused by these fleas. There are several factors that lead the archaeologists to say that these are still human-made. The holes in the human-made ones are larger, on average, than the holes produced by fleas. So there's that. Fleas can seemingly still produce holes that size, it seems, but it's rare. So these holes are larger than average. And these 3 osteoderms with the large holes seem to be kind of polished. That this could have been caused by them being worn as jewelry and just rubbing against the skin, rubbing against the clothing, creating this polishing of them. You can see this one here looks very smooth. This one here, very, very smooth. The ones that are produced by fleas, very rough. So here's an interesting image, also from Andre's blog. Shout out to Andre at Archaeo Thoughts. I'll put the link to it and to the paper that it's from down below, which I have downloaded, but for some reason can't open the supplementary material. Annoying. These are more holes made by fleas in osteoderms. Some of them are about 5 millimeters big, just like the ones in Brazil. But also they're not very polished. You can see they're super rough texture. So I don't know what to make of it. On the one hand, fleas are capable of producing these holes, it seems. But on the other hand, why are these ones so polished? The team behind this latest paper have done some experiments to try and recreate the markings found on these sloth osteoderms by drilling into them. And they were successful. They're able to repeat the markings found on these osteoderms, and they were able to rule out rodents being involved. The rodent markings look totally different. You can clearly see like the deep grooves caused by their teeth. So they're not taking it for granted. They are trying to test this idea and recreate it experimentally. Just because these marks can be created by a drill, does that necessarily 100% guarantee they are made by a drill? I don't know. It's such a tricky one. It's a tricky one. The ones that are argued to be made by humans do seem to be different in some ways to the ones produced by fleas. I don't know what to make of it, guys. I really don't. If the other osteoderms at the site did not have holes in, I would be really confident, like, oh wow, these are human-made. But could it not just be that by chance something happened in the erosion of the soil that just caused these three to be more polished? I don't know. I don't know what to make of it. And if it was made by humans, why did they only turn 3 out of the thousands and thousands of osteoderms that were there into jewelry? Why just 3? It's a tricky one. It's a tricky one. One thing to quickly say about Santa Elena cave, rock shelter, is that this is definitely a place where humans were living. You can see to the side of me a picture of the stratigraphy of the site. You get charcoal concentrations that are fireplaces, lots of stone tools and things like that. For sure, up to like 14,000 years ago, 14,000 years ago, it's definitely a place where humans were living. But as you get lower than that, then there's not any more fireplaces. And then the stone tools, at least according to people that know more about it than me, become more questionable. These are the stone tools found in association with those osteoderms, the alleged stone tools. I do feel like these look less handmade than the one we discussed on site number 1 in Oregon. I do feel like these are looking a little bit less obviously human-made. Maybe I'm wrong though. Maybe I'm wrong. Let me know in the comments if I'm just sort of imagining that. For example, B here does look kind of like a rock to me. But it's way beyond my ability to critique these things, really. Let me know if I'm imagining this. So it is a site that humans for sure used. Just did they use it 27,000 years ago based on 3 polished pieces of bone with holes in a site where lots of other pieces of bone also have holes in, caused by disgusting fleas. Tricky one. So how do these 2 sites change our view of the peopling of the Americas? That's a tricky question. With Rimrock Draw, I would say not that much. It's just 5,000 years before Clovis. In the grand scheme of things, that's a small gap in archaeology. If we hypothesize that this pre-Clovis population, founding population of all Native Americans was quite small, it's going to leave a light trace, and this site is in the region where people probably entered America for the first time. Doesn't really rock the boat too much, just adds this growing body of evidence we have for pre-Clovis sites in America. Santa Elena, at 27,000 years ago, is a little bit more of a problem. What's that? 14,000 years before Clovis, and beyond the current genetic estimates we have for the peopling of the Americas. If these artifacts were genuinely made by humans, that would mean a couple of things. First, that our genetic estimates for the peopling of the Americas are off. Most geneticists put the peopling of the Americas at sort of like 15 to 18,000 years ago. That sort of time frame. So either way, geneticists are wrong about that. That could be possible. Could be wrong. There's loads we don't know about the genetic history of Native Americans. Or the genetic estimate is right, and that the people that left these tools, modified these osteoderms, did not leave any genetic descendants, which is also possible. That does happen in prehistory. The question is then, who are these people? Who are they related to? Why do we find evidence of them in Brazil and maybe not other places? That'd be tricky to say. There was a long held bias in favor of Clovis first in American archaeology. That is no more. But if there was a population widespread across the Americas, 15,000 years before Clovis, then where are the rest of the tools? How come we don't have like a map like this of thousands of sites of these pre-Clovis tools? if the population was widespread? It's a tricky one. It's a tricky one. As I say, most archaeological sites are not found by archaeologists. So we can't explain that gap just on the bias of archaeologists. You could go out for a walk across North America now, and you might find a Clovis point. There's a lot of them. There's a lot of them. You're probably not likely to go for a walk and find one, but you could. You could. Lots have been found. So yeah, if Santa Elena is true, who are these people? How do they relate to modern Native Americans or not? And where are the rest of their sites? I can't answer those questions. I can't answer those questions. Prehistory Man gives up its secrets tentatively, slowly. It's always teasing us. We'll have to see what happens with this one. More work needs to be done. And this is absolutely not the end of the debate about when humans arrived in Americas. That much I can guarantee you. This is not the end of this debate. I think I'll end the video right there. Boop. Oh, well, I booped too early. I gotta turn the camera off. A boop.